Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what side of the globe you're joining us from. My name is Dr. Dana Wohl. I am a social psychologist and the Director for Customer Success at Jove. Thank you for joining us today for our second session of our Innovation in Instruction webinar series, in which you'll hear from the 2021 Jove Science Education and Research Innovation Award winners as they discuss their innovative solution to advancing scientific research and education. In this session, moving traditionally in-person science courses online, 2021 Innovation and Instruction Award winner Claudia Jorgensen will share how she moved from traditionally in-person science courses to completely remote sessions while establishing practices that enhance student learning. Before we proceed, I'd like to get some housekeeping items out of the way. Can everyone please use the raise hand icon on their toolbox to let me know that you can hear me? Okay, great. If you'd like to ask our speaker any questions, please submit them in the Q&A section of your toolbox, and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of our discussion. You will receive a recording of this webinar in your email in the next 24 hours. And lastly, at the conclusion of the session, there will be a brief 5-question survey, and we'd appreciate you providing your feedback so we can continue to improve our webinars. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-panelists, Dr. Claudia Jorgensen, Associate Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience Outreach Coordinator at Utah Valley State University in the United States. Thank you for joining us today, Claudia.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. So the class that we're talking about is behavioral neuroscience. So normally this class is taught as a face-to-face class, and we actually get to use sheep brains and a plastinated human brain and other brain models. And so obviously we're talking about moving this class online. And so I want to share with you what I did to make this class work online. And so very briefly, I wanted to give you this outline. I will tell you some of the goals and how I accomplished them. So I really wanted to make sure that we can asynchronously deliver this course. I really wanted to create an engaging and an interactive environment. So we needed to have engaging and interactive content. I also wanted to establish a community for my students. I also had in mind the learner-centered teaching environment, and I wanted to really allow collaborative learning because I know that fosters critical thinking. And I really wanted to use an authentic assessment rather than a cumulative final, which I will go into a little bit more detail in a second. Okay, so asynchronous. Why did I focus on asynchronous? Our university offered live streaming, but we have a lot of non-traditional students. So Utah Valley University is the biggest university in Utah. It's a public university, and we have a lot of students who are non-traditional in the sense that not only are they married and have family, I have lots of students who are younger than me and have older children than I have, but they also work in addition going to school. So some of them work part-time, some of them work full-time. Also, the pandemic provided a whole bunch of different challenges so that there might have been caregiving issues. If someone was in quarantine, they have to be at home, maybe taking care of loved ones who were maybe sick with COVID. And so really that was providing challenges to the students to be able to attend classes at a specific time. So what did I do? I essentially made all of the course content available via the LMS that we are using. We're using Canvas. And then what isn't on the LMS, I provided via OneNote, which is integrated with our Microsoft Teams software that is linked with the LMS. Also, instead of having very locked times for the quizzes that I was using as the assessment, I just provided a closing date so they could choose whenever they wanted to take the quiz during that particular module. They were able to take that quiz rather than having to take it at a specific time, like an hour time slot. Also, I wanted to have engaging and interactive content. We know if you're interacting with the material, if you're engaging with the material, it actually increases learning rather than just passively reading a textbook passage. And so what I did is I used Storyline both for the lecture component as well as for the lab component. I will show you how one of those looks like after I'm done with this presentation so that we don't have to be switching back and forth too many times. Storyline is a really cool software. If you're not familiar with it, benefit. It allows you to create, I call them clickable PowerPoints. Essentially, it allows you to create content that is both immersive, engaging, as well as interactive. And again, I'll provide you with a couple of examples when we get to that point later. Another thing that I was really looking for is establishing a community. So we know in a classroom setting, right, I will go into the classroom, I can talk to my students, we can have small talk before and after class. You can create a community. Online, especially if it is asynchronous, right, that is a challenge because I don't meet with my students on a regular basis. I won't walk into the classroom, I can't greet them, I can't see their emotions very well. And so what I did know is that I really wanted to create this community of inquiry where the students don't just feel connected to me, but also to the other students, because we do know based on research that there's this link of feeling connected and also then staying in the class, especially, right, during the pandemic, all of us felt pretty isolated. We were stuck at home, we weren't really going anywhere. And so this connectedness was really important. And so what did I do? I had discussions that the students had to do. And instead of having them type out the discussions, I actually asked them to record them via video. So we were talking about small, short discussions, 3 minutes long. They were responding to a video prompt and usually 5 to 6 different questions. And so they were recording their video and then they had to reply back to someone else's video. And so that really allowed, right, this presence. Students were seeing each other, I was seeing my students. And so that was one of the components on how I was establishing a community. In addition to this, I also had students work in teams. So I essentially used the tool, it's called CADME, where had students essentially provide me with some background information, and then I assigned them to permanent teams. And inside teams, okay, inside their teams, I wanted them to establish a team contract. I wanted them to establish a team name. In spring semester, I think my favorite was ganglions, but they actually said ganglions, which is kind of a punny, right, neuroscience joke. And then I also wanted them to meet in teams. And so for all of those teamwork components, we used Microsoft Teams. And I just wanted to show you a couple screenshots here. So inside Teams, this is one section from spring. I created private channels, okay? And so you can see on the very bottom, team 1, they named themselves brainstormers, okay? And so there's the ganglions, okay? And so they had their own team association. It was a private channel. Nobody else but the team members could access that channel. It allowed them a private space to exchange information, to be able to meet and discuss the problems that I was assigning to them. I also wanted to highlight that when you're looking at this particular screen, this is a screenshot from inside one of those private channels. And so you can see here that students actually using that modality. The class is asynchronous. I'm not telling them they have to meet, but they're using this. They're setting up a time. For some, it's early in the morning, for some of them in the middle of the day, some later at night, but they're actually meeting. Okay, and so on the right side, you can see those little tiny circles with their initials in it. That indicates how many people in that student group were actually attending that meeting. Okay. I also was interested in a learner-centered teaching approach. And so again, what that means is, right, we've all grown up kind of with this idea that learning is that there is this sage on the stage, right? And we're listening to them and we're taking notes and then hopefully we have learned, right? But based on research we have in the more recent past, we have learned that that really isn't helpful for learning, right? We can learn the best if it is student-centered, if it is learner-centered. And so I really wanted to have this learner-centered component because we know that increases student learning, but it also increases course completion and student success. And so what did I do? First of all, when we were talking about those discussions, I usually provided 2 or 4 different choices. They only had to watch one of those TED video talks, and then they choose which one they wanted to actually record their discussion on. So they had a choice. Each one of those talks would relate to the modules, but right, you could choose based on interest what you wanted to listen to and what you wanted to essentially reflect on. Another component that I did is I wanted to have this, this portion where I wanted the students to reflect on the course content on a regular basis. And so what I did is I asked those team those teams of students to provide me with 2 takeaways each week. So things that they've learned in this module, but also provide me with a muddy point. And so for each team, I would reply back on what they have taken away and also the kind of things that they struggled with. And so it was really learner-centered because not every single group had the same kind of struggle in understanding the specific types of topics. And so here's just a screenshot out of OneNote where 2 of my students essentially provided 2 takeaways and a muddy point. Everything that's highlighted in green, you can see that those are comments that I've made in response to the students, right? And so I can really tailor my responses to what the students are struggling with, right? And provide them guidance so that they can understand the material. And again, it's learner-centered because every single student, every single team would have different struggles. Not everybody is struggling with the same concepts. And sometimes, right, they just say, oh, I had no muddy points. I just need to practice a little bit more. All right. I also wanted to create a collaborative learning environment, okay? And by that, I mean is I really wanted to have student groups that are functioning, okay? Because we know that collaboration essentially engages learners. Again, it's this active learning component, which then increases learning. And also when you're working as a team and you have collaboration going on, you can actually use more complex applied questions for the students group to actually go through. And so that means once they have mastered those kind of things, it will also increase their critical thinking. And so how did I do that? First of all, I created those private Teams channels that I've already talked to you about. And so that was a means for me, right, to make sure that every single team had a specific place where they can communicate. And then to really have this collaboration take place, I assigned those weekly reflections that I also just showed you in OneNote, but then they also had lab work to do that they had to do together. And in the very end, instead of having a multiple choice final, that is, for example, on a lockdown browser where you can't open any other windows, and it's a timed kind of exam, I provided them with a semester project. And I will tell you in just a minute a little bit more about the semester project. But the really cool thing about OneNote is that I can include all of those multimedia resources for the students really to interact with each other, look at videos, look at pictures and all of those different kinds of things to really foster, right, this collaboration. And so I'm going to show you a screenshot of what OneNote might look like when you're thinking about working on the brain. So here you're looking at the side view, so it would be this part right here of a sheep brain. And the students have to label specific structures. And what you can see here is that all of the coloring that you see, those were labeled by students. And on the right side, you can see the little initials, TM and KM. Those are actually student initials. And so that indicates to me who has participated, and I can even look at the time frame at what time they have submitted their answers. And then I can give them feedback. So you can see the little tiny check marks right here. I crossed off all of the correctly marked answers. Okay. Now, lastly, I wanted to highlight the semester project. So I wanted to have an authentic assessment rather than a multiple choice final. Okay, there are limitations with those traditional cumulative multiple choice exams in an online course format, right? One of the issues is integrity, right? Can we really make sure that students are not cheating? We know that sometimes, right, unfortunately, we've seen it while students were told you need to pass this final, you need to work on it yourself. We have seen it on campus. Students were actually huddled in a group together, exchanging answers on their phone, right? Because obviously the lockdown browser doesn't work on a second device. And so that was an issue. Another issue with a lot of those multiple choice exams is that those questions really, right, multiple choice questions, they can be applied, but many of them really just target those lower levels on Bloom's taxonomy, right? It's like the regurgitation component. But I wanted to have a more holistic view of what the students have learned throughout the class. And so I came up with this idea of creating this authentic assessment. And so what I did is I used a series of case studies and I just packaged it as one huge case study. And it's totally made up. The components of the case studies were based on true actual things, but the way that I packaged it were unreal. So that means you can't actually go on the internet and Google, hey, Mr. B had this condition, what was his disorder, right? And so I was able to compile those case studies in such a way that it was really touching on all of the topics throughout the entire semester. And this semester project was completed by each team in OneNote over the course of a week and a half before finals week. Okay, and so I will show you now. I'm going to switch screens. Let me see where I need to go. I need to exit this. I did this once. New share. Here we go. I'm going to show you Storyline first. Okay, so this is inside Canvas. Okay, so you can see over here, there's things to choose from. This is Storyline for the first module. We're in consciousness right now, right? You can see we can put pictures in, images, cartoons, whatever, not wording. And then let's see, hopefully it works. I refreshed this earlier. The really cool thing is that, look, you can do a drop and drag. So here it's asking the student, you know, hey, which one of those kind of situations would show consciousness? So infant, right? Yes, we know conscious. Reading is conscious, coma. Well, I don't really know, right? So it may depend. Anesthesia, it depends. Oh, it's red. It indicates to the student that's wrong. You're actually unconscious. When you're thinking about daydreaming, right? Conscious when you're thinking about death, when you're thinking about deep sleep. Oh, whoops, deep sleep is actually unconscious. You get immediate feedback for the student. And then a couple other things, hopefully, that I wanted to show you here. You can put in links. So this will take you to a page outside of Canvas. So another kind of source. And then another thing that I wanted to highlight for you is, right, you can provide clickable options where the student has to submit, right, what kind of hemisphere is involved with language. They get immediate feedback for that. And again, that's why I called it clickable PowerPoint. You can embed GIFs. So this one right here is showing where the corpus callosum is. And then the last feature that I wanted to share with you is that we can have multiple choice questions. Okay, and so just gonna click right here. I know the answers because I wrote the question. Student gets feedback. If they don't get it correct, you can set it however you want, how many times they can take it. And you can also embed videos that will play right outside of this particular kind of OneNote or Storyline, sorry. I'm gonna have to see, I'm gonna have to make this smaller for a second because my screen is a little wonky. And so here's another type of Storyline. This is specifically for the lab content. And so obviously we're learning about brain structures. And so look how neat this is. The student can click here, click on frontal lobe. It actually opens a new page. It highlights, right, the frontal lobe inside the left hemisphere. It also shows a static image. And then it also shows, again, a GIF. Okay, and so again, I found this really helpful because the students can actually interact with the material. Okay, lastly, I want to show you very quickly OneNote. I don't actually know what the time frame looks like. I don't know how we're doing on time, Dana. I hope you're doing okay. Okay, so here's good. So here's OneNote. So OneNote for our university is actually integrated with Microsoft Teams. And so I'm just showing you my master copy. I like working off Teams on this because then I can see who has submitted something. But so you can see over on the left right here, right, I have one designation for every single module. And so we are right now in module 4. And what I'm showing you here is everything that is associated with the lab. And so you can import images, you can create tables, you can essentially provide material for the students, right? If we scroll down here, the students easily can interact with it so they can take, you know, notes on it, whatever they want. We can then put more pieces of information in. What I also wanted to show you is that you can embed videos straight into it so that they can watch it there. I've also linked interactive resources. Again, what I found is really helpful for an online class is just to provide a whole bunch of different pieces of information. And we're looking at, for example, module 6. Okay, I have explore pages. So there's brain images on there that are unlabeled and labeled. So the student, if they wanted to, they can actually label it. And then again, when we're asking the students to submit their answers, right, this is how a page will look like. I showed you a screenshot of this earlier. So the students will just see this. They have the prompt and then they have to actually label the structures. But now, lastly, I wanted to highlight for you that semester project. So here we have, I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger. So here we have the semester project. Again, this is at the very end of the semester. I give them some prompts. I tell them, right, that they can use all of their notes, that they can work as a team. They should be working together as a team. I'm just, right, providing them with some background. I tell them that they can use the internet, but it can be very misleading because it's not the information on the internet that I want them to show me, right? I want them to use the information that they've learned in the class and apply it to the concepts that I've given them. And so here you can see, right, the scenario actually, you traveled by time machine, fancy, right? And you landed in 2053, okay? And so again, if you use the internet won't know what's going on in 2053, right? And so then I have different problem sets. And so I have different images imported, right? So I have a healthy neuron and an unhealthy neuron. And then based on how this unhealthy neuron looks, they have to figure out what the consequences would be of this unhealthy neuron to the individual, right, that they're investigating. And so then, again, you can have tables where they have to provide their answers. And so what is really nice about a setup like this is instead of just a multiple choice, right, where they would be describing something and maybe selecting the answer, what I'm really interested in is this defending of their answer, because that really shows me the critical thinking component, right? If you have a multiple choice question, you could have just guessed, right? You could have just ended up lucky and picking the correct answer. But if you have to provide a defense on why that was the correct choice, right, then that really provides that critical thinking component. Here we have another neuron example. Just literally, we're going through all of those different components. Here I have, right, an image. I'm pointing at something specific, and they have to tell me which part of the nervous system this belongs to, right? So they will select the answer. And again, we have this defense. They have to tell me why this is the correct choice. And I also tell them, please also tell me why it is not the correct choice. Again, reiterating this point that if you really have to apply the information, right, I can see whether or not learning has taken place. We have a couple of images that would show just orientation. One of my favorite ones is this one. I'm showing them a spinal cord right here. I'm showing them where damage occurred. And then on the right side, you can see everything in red. I've indicated, okay, this is where the spinal cord damage is for just this particular segment inside the spinal cord. And then they have to tell me what is the consequence, right? So I give them a limited set of choices. They have to provide me with the choices that they think, but again, they have to defend their answer. Now, you can't Google something like this because there is no such person out there, right? So there is not this particular person that has this particular spinal cord damage right here and nothing else, okay? And so again, I made it, I tried it. I made it so that they really can't Google different things. Again, we're applying different kinds of pieces. And then this was the funniest part. I've essentially went through the whole wild world map, right? Searching for brain images. And I didn't really care where they came from. I didn't really care what the person had, but I needed to have something that was identifiable, that something was damaged, something was altered. Now here's the funny part. If you put a little ellipse on this or a circle or something like this and then save it as an image, you cannot do a reverse image search because that image doesn't exist. And so the students can't even clip this image, put it in reverse image generator, and then figure out where this image came from. So what I want them to look at is I'm identifying them. Something looks off in this area that I'm highlighting in yellow. You have to tell me what kind of deficit do you think it is? Okay, and it's pretty gray. Students did struggle, and I had to help them a little tiny bit because they were like, but Dr. J, there's no correct answer. There's no one single correct answer. It's not like 2 + 2 = 4, right? You can argue. If you say that there's brain damage in a specific region, right, you have to then defend what that type of behavioral deficit will be. Okay, and so again, students were applying that piece of information that they had learned throughout the semester. And with that, I'm going to just, I guess I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can open it up to questions.
That was fascinating, Dr. Jorgensen. Thank you for sharing your class, your course with us. I would love to take your class. I think what stood out to me was the way you engaged critical thinking, and that's notoriously difficult with students learning remotely, right? To get them to avoid using those mental shortcuts and actually challenge themselves to come up with a reasonable defense in support of the response. I really thought that was really cool. Some great questions coming in. So first, you have a really well organized online course. What was it like bringing your in-person course, migrating all of this to Canvas and delivering this online? Must have been a huge investment of labor.
Yeah, Lots of gray hair. So, think of me being the face-to-face person. I've taught one section. You're not talking about an entire class. I've only taught ever one section online of Psychopharm, and it went okay. I wasn't very fond of teaching online at that point. I feel like my weird, bizarre kind of sense of humor comes out in the classroom because I have this really bizarre background. I grew up in East Germany, so there's always those kind of weird conversations that they just happen naturally inside the classroom, but they don't happen online. And so that's what I really struggled with because, again, right, like you're trying to take all of those weird, bizarre things online. And so that was one main component. Another issue that I really struggled with, it's a really hands-on class, right? When I first joined the university, I talked to the department chair and I said, I want to order some sheep brains. And she's like, wait, you want to order sheep brains? This is nuts. And so again, like taking that component online was really challenging. And so I saw someone give a talk on OneNote, and it was actually a math professor at my university. And I was like, oh, OneNote is so cool. I'm going to have to use that. And so I found OneNote to be really helpful to help with those images. Again, it's not quite where we want it to be. There's still some more modifications that we would like to have. But, it's the best thing that we can have. Another thing that really helped is I attended a virtual conference last year by the faculty for undergraduate neuroscience or in neuroscience. We were really trying to figure out what are the types of resources that we have to teach biopsychology courses. And so I actually started a collaboration with another colleague of mine to try to put a database together of like all of those different kinds of resources. And I have been using another colleague friend of mine who has a Facebook group where there's a lot of resources being shared. And so I definitely mined all of the different kinds of things that I could find for all of the different input. How can I make this work? How can I, really put this class the way that I wanted it to really take shape? And it worked. There's still work to do, but I feel like for what it was, right, the first one in spring, I think it was pretty successful.
Sure. Now, relatedly, what about the learning curve for students using this technology for the first time? Maybe they haven't used Teams before or had limited experience with Canvas. What was the learning curve for them to get up to speed?
So I'm going to contest spring to fall. So in spring semester, I essentially just kind of threw them in there. It worked really well for some students. It didn't work so well for other students. And so the semester feedback kind of indicated that some students struggled with Teams and some students struggled with OneNote. And then some other students are like, oh, yep, I got this. Everything is cool, right? But yes, there's a lot of new technology. I tried to minimize it, so I wasn't trying to introduce a whole bunch of different things. But to really help those students who were struggling in spring, I decided to do something a little bit different in fall. And so what I did is I had what I called mandatory check-ins. So the first 2 weeks of my time was literally spent meeting with every single student for 10 minutes. And I asked them, and we met in Teams, okay? And so I asked them, what's your goal for the class? How are you gonna accomplish it, right? And how can I help you? And so pretty soon, right, because this was the first 2 weeks, it became pretty obvious if students were comfortable with Teams or if they were not comfortable with Teams. If they were not comfortable with Teams, I could very quickly show them, hey, let me share my screen. Let me take you there. This is where Teams is. This is where OneNote is. And it is really interesting. There's 2 students. I have not been able to get them to meet with me. And those are the students that are struggling. All of the other students across the board, they know where to go. They know to, find their meeting. They are really comfortable with OneNote now. But those 2 students who I failed, and I've reached out multiple times, but I just have not been able to meet with them one-on-one. They are really struggling. Again, there might have been students too, right, that weren't struggling even though they haven't met with me. But again, I feel like I was able to very quickly, show them. And I found that a lot more direct, helping each individual student rather than just creating another video for a student to watch, like, hey, watch this tutorial on how to get to OneNote. And so I found that a whole lot better. And so I'm hoping, right, I can follow up with that and let you know later. But right now, it feels like if you just do a little bit of intermediation very early on, that you can really help them with that interface. And our university only uses Teams. We don't use Zoom. And so most students were already familiar, at least with the baseline of Teams. The OneNote was an added thing inside Teams. So that was definitely a learning curve.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you've had experience teaching both traditional and non-traditional students, certainly very different audience. You mentioned that these are students they're working full time, they have families, they have children. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like teaching the non-traditional student versus a traditional undergrad right out of high school? What's the dynamic like with those two different class populations?
Yeah, so our university serves a lot of non-traditional students, and what I see with them is I adapted it. I asked my colleague if I can borrow it, but she called it the circle of safety. And so the circle of safety was kind of mirrored after Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith on what they're doing in their house. So they have the circle of safety where they just huddle around and they're like, tell me all of the things. And it's the safe circle. So if you tell me now, you can't get punished. So I'm trying to use that whenever a student gets in trouble, like they didn't turn in an assignment, they fell behind, they didn't take a quiz or something like this, I tell them about the circle of safety. And so what I've really seen is that non-traditional students really just have a whole bunch of different things coming up, right? Like I have a student right now, he's working in healthcare. I feel terrible for him. Like his schedule is just so busy. Like the hospitals are overrun by COVID patients. Like sometimes he just doesn't get out because, right, if his relief shift doesn't come in, he can't leave. And so his schedule is completely unpredictable. So we have a lot of those kind of things where students are all of a sudden like, oh my goodness, I had to take my daughter to the hospital because, right, she fell and bumped her elbow and like we had to investigate this. And so what I found with non-traditional students, you really have to just, give them the benefit of the doubt. You have to be supportive and tell them, okay, you fell behind, let's get you back on track, right? Be really adaptable in your timeline for different assignments. At first, it was always like I would grant a certain grace period, right? And then I would take points off. I no longer do that. I really work with students. I will reach out. There's always red flags when students kind of just stop communicating back. And so then I get more forceful because I know that they have, family backgrounds and whatever not. What I've seen with our more traditional students, many of them are younger. And so with them, right, they might not have the same approach with the type of class, like understanding, okay, even if it is, an assignment that only is worth 5 points, if you add it up throughout the semester, it might be 10%, right? You might not have that full understanding of the course load. And so with them, I specifically work on, hey, you probably want to invest in all of the different assignments so that you really can, get some points for every single thing. But again, I don't really distinguish between, okay, non-traditional versus traditional student. I try to work with the individual more so than versus if it's traditional versus non-traditional, because even if you have more quote unquote traditional student, not married, right, straight out of high school, what if they're a first gen student, right? And they're intimidated of reaching out. They don't maybe know all of the get arounds in the university, right? And so then you really have to work with them. Hey, you can feel comfortable reaching out to me, right? If you're struggling, the university has amazing resources, those different kinds of things. So more so than focusing on non-traditional versus traditional, I really try to hone in what is the student struggling with and how I can help them.
Okay. Now, question that's kind of come up persistently here is the issue of academic integrity and cheating. You've mentioned some really effective, what I believe are effective strategies to kind of suppress that. Certainly, there's always going to be students looking for that shortcut, not being in a physical classroom. It creates more opportunities for them to breach their academic integrity. What are some strategies that you would recommend for faculty members on this call teaching online courses that are dealing with this issue? It's a very real one.
I really like applied things. So what I've done with the discussions as well, what I've put in is that they have to answer specific questions that are more yes, right, wrong, or whatever not, but then also an applied question. So like, how does this topic relate to your life? Because again, that you can't really cheat on that, right? Like you can either apply the concept to your life or you can't. Another thing that I found really helpful is, so I do weekly quizzes. I do use a lockdown browser. I didn't want to use Proctorio, which our university also has. Proctorio forces the student to switch on their microphone and their camera, but you don't know what their household is like, right? Maybe they're having roommates, maybe they have small children at home, maybe they're not comfortable sharing their house, right? And so again, I didn't want to use that, but I do use lockdown browser so that they at least can't easily Google things, right, on the same device. Now, don't mind me, right? Like they could still do it on a different device. So what I tried to do is I've been reworking all of the multiple choice questions. I really tried to have them be applied. And then I've done it the backwards way. I put my question in Google and search if that question has appeared on some kind of interface that the student might look for, like Course Hero or something like this, where they might have questions that are similar. If they are, then I'm revamping my question because in a previous semester, maybe a student has posted one of my questions. So I do that. And then another thing that I found really helpful, I just started this semester, I have the student as part of the quiz write their own applied question. And so they have to submit it along with the quiz. And so I force them, it's graded on 4 different criteria. It has to relate to the learning objectives. So it has to be a topic that we chose. It has to have 4 different answers. 3 of them are distractors. 1 of them is a correct answer. They have to be solid answers. Like you can't just say A is not the correct answer. B is not the correct answer, right? Like you have to have actually good distractors. And then I forget what the first one. Oh, the 4th one is applied. So you can't just ask a question that is just regurgitation. And so I really force students, right, to think about this. Now it makes up a minor portion of the quiz grade, but it literally brings you right from 12 points to 18 points if you don't submit this kind of question. And so far I've gotten really good feedback on that. So that's one component. The authentic assignment also I found really helpful. And then later on in the semester, what I have the students do, I have them identify brain structures. And so it will be through our LMS. And the student actually has to apply the information. So I'm going to ask them, hey, on this brain piece, can you highlight what the longitudinal fissure is? And so then they have to actually put a marker on the longitudinal fissure. And so by that, right, you can't search the answer specifically because you still have to, even if you Google it on a different device, you still have to identify it correctly on the image that I'm looking for. And also another thing that I've learned early on, and I struggled with it a lot, if students really try to look up information somewhere else, right? Did they then succeed and apply the information? Because if you have an applied question, even if they looked up the information, right, which you don't want them to do, if they looked it up online somewhere, and they did something that you don't want them to do, but then they still got the correct answer, does that still show understanding? And so I feel it does. And so I've gotten a little bit more lenient. It still scares me, and I still prefer the face-to-face in-class quizzes. Here you go, here's your packet, fill this out. But online is here to stay. This class is not just a pandemic thing, like it will actually remain afterwards. And so I had to curb my anxiety back a little bit. There will be some cheating, right? But I'm hoping that with putting some of those measures in place, I can reduce it. Okay. And I'm hoping that I'm establishing an environment early on that the students feel comfortable, that they don't feel like they need to cheat, because we don't have, right, a 20-second exam and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough time. Let me look up the information, right? I'm hoping that they feel comfortable applying all of this information and feeling good about, okay, I can look over my notes, right? I can apply all of the information that I've used. And so hopefully, you know, that's another component. That's also one of the reasons why I use weekly quizzes rather than exams, because I feel students do better if you quiz them regularly rather than having this big, huge exam that kind of just popped up because they forgot, right? And then they have to cram. And then when students cram, that's when, you know, you have more cheating happening because students are like, oh my gosh, I didn't study enough. You know, let me pull up the information. But here I force them to really review the information on a weekly level. And so they really have to stick with the material. And so guess what? Even if they don't want to, there will be stuff that gets stuck because they have reviewed it over and over and over again. And so hopefully that helps. But yes, take a deep breath. There will be some cheating. You won't prevent everything.
Sure, certainly. So let's take a step, I guess, more broadly. You mentioned that e-learning is here to stay. I completely agree. Now, in terms of optimal learning outcomes for students, let's say you're teaching the same course online, the same course in person, who do you think is which section do you think will have a better prepared students at the end of the semester?
That's a good question. I actually had a conversation with one of my beloved colleagues about that, because we have some software that we can use in the lab that we have not been able to integrate yet into the online version. And so ultimately, there are some things that we can offer face-to-face that we couldn't easily offer online. So like brain dissection. you can't really do that online. But then there's other components that students will get out of the online component that students can't get in the face-to-face component, which is obviously honing their skills in time management, right? Being accountable for your own learning, setting that time aside, and then also the technology component. So when you're thinking about this online course, right, they're really learning to work together as a team in an online modality, and still, right, creating those collaboration components, even though it isn't face-to-face. And so I wouldn't necessarily say one is disadvantaged and the other one is advantaged. It's a matter of looking at what kind of skills is each type of student taking away. And so obviously, if you want to go into neuroscience and you want to do, work specifically on the brain, and you want to be able to do brain dissections and like all of those hands-on kinds of things, maybe the face-to-face class would provide you a little bit with an edge, right? On the other hand, if you're, for example, interested in, for example, studying the brain, like let's say with electron encephalography, those kind of skill sets, with the kind of information that you're getting through the online version, you can still then apply in that type of scenario. And so those students wouldn't be disadvantaged. But again, right, they might have a leg up because of the fact that they have had more technology exposure. And so again, it's different, rather than one better or worse than the other, if that makes sense.
Certainly. Yes, for sure. So lots of attendees are interested in connecting with you, exchanging ideas, learning a little bit more about the tools you've been using. Is it okay if they do so? Okay, that would be great. Any last final questions for Dr. Jorgensen? Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights. Unfortunately, it's all the time we do have for today. But thank you so much, Dr. Jorgensen, for taking time to be part of this discussion today. Just a reminder that this recording will be available over email. And next week, we have a final session coming up on improving learning outcomes in the hybrid science classroom. So that'll be next Wednesday, October 6th. 12 p.m. BST. So be sure to sign up for more insights and discussions. Thank you again for everyone's attendance, and especially you, Dr. Jorgensen. Again, emphatic congratulations on your win here. Really fascinating stuff. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity for letting me present.
Pleasure is ours. Have a great rest of the day, and thank you to everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your week.